back to another episode of Sexy Marriage Radio.
Always good to be
Alongside
here.
my wife Pam,
Always
having
good.
conversations about life and love and marriage and sex. And it's interesting because a little bit of behind the scenes, if you will, life is what happens when you're making other plans.
Yeah.
And that's where we've kind of come with that mindset of how do you try to remain flexible. If you do make plans, how do you make sure they're in pencil? Because circumstances and life happen, which require us to either stick our head in the sand and act like it's not happening, or face it and adjust and be flexible.
I vote for facing it and adjusting.
I think absolutely in the long run, that is the route to go and to choose.
Yeah.
Because if nothing else, you get better and you face life on life terms better, which is a lot of what's required in marriage, is a lot of what's required in sex, actually. These are themes we've used throughout the life of Sexy Marriage Radio, which is, you could sum it up in some ways of it's facing and dealing with the spouse you have, not the one you wish you had.
Okay.
I mean, that seems to ring true to me, at least. So welcome to the show.
It does. Sounds more like it's dealing with my spouse rather than me, though, which I think is more of our focus, of dealing with me. But we'll move on.
I think that's a fair exploration real quick, because it's still part of dealing with me is dealing with what reality is.
Yeah, dealing with my expectations.
Not the fantasy and the ideal that I keep holding out hope for, because then ultimately we're both doomed.
Yeah.
But when I get better at facing what's going on in my life, with family, with marriage, with kids, everything, I can face it better.
I
earn my own self-respect. Yeah, I earn my own self-respect as I go forward. And when you're talking about a vibrant sex life, self-respect is a huge component in it for both parties. So, well, if you're new to the show, welcome. Let us know what questions you've got, or comments, thoughts, things going on in your world you want to share. 214-702-9565 is the email. Nope, that would be a voicemail line. And then the email is feedback@sexymarriageradio.com. And coming up today on the regular version, we're going to dive into the world of the love languages.
Okay.
And how I think there's a lot of times I come across, there's an email that will help set this up, but I keep coming across this idea of, but I'm really good at displaying their love languages, and yet it's not resulting in more sex or more desire or more passion.
Okay.
And so we're going to unpack. Those are different things.
Yeah.
And then on the extended content today, which is deeper is longer and there's no ads, you can subscribe at smr.fm/academy. We're going to jump into somewhat of a continuation of the concept that we did several episodes back on vulnerability and the role it can play, and how oftentimes when we're vulnerable, it may not be met with glorious, inviting, open arms. Yeah. Instead, it can be met with, I can't believe you said that or believe that, or some sort of reaction.
Yes.
And so where does safety and trust fit into the whole process of vulnerability?
Absolutely.
And so all that's coming up right after this. So this is the email that came in to feedback@sexymarriageradio.com. And this is, Dear Corey and Pam, I listened to SMR for quite some time now, and I've always loved the insights and thoughts. I've been married to my wife for over 15 years, and I strive to be attentive to her needs and show love in ways that resonate with her, whether it's through her particular love language, which acts of service or words of affirmation is her. I make sure to help her around the house, and we co-manage the kids and family well. Despite all of this, I can't seem to ignite that spark of passion and desire in her. The only time she seems to get truly turned on is when we're on vacation. It's almost as if the change in scenery and routine trigger something within her, and we experience moments of intense intimacy and pleasure that we rarely encounter in day-to-day life. So I find myself wondering, what is it about vacations that brings us closer together in such a profound way? Is it the absence of all the stressors or responsibilities? Is it an adventure and spontaneity? Or is it simply an opportunity to escape the monotony? So whatever the reason may be, I'm long to experience the same level here on a regular basis at home. I want to find ways to reignite the flame in our intimacy and create deeper, more fulfilling bonds between us. I'm willing to do the work and make changes where necessary, but I'm not quite sure where to start. So I'd be incredibly grateful if you could offer some thoughts or insights of how to better connect and cultivate a satisfying, fulfilling sex life. Are there specific strategies or techniques, anything you can do that can help us with our day-to-day lives? I'm all ears. Thank you so much. A helpful husband. So there's a lot we can do with this because we've alluded to the idea of vacation sex and how that's sometimes in its own category.
Absolutely.
It's hard to replicate because it's vacation.
Yeah. And so to his question, is it that there's no to-do list and things like that? Yes, that's part of it.
Well, ultimately, she needs to answer that question for him, but we can speculate.
Okay.
We can speculate.
From a human being, from my perspective, yes, there's a relaxation. I don't have all the to-do lists of my house. I don't have,
right.
If it's just you and I going away, it's more relaxing, right? If we're taking the kids with us, sometimes it's a little bit different story. But if it's just the two of us, going away,
change ups help us on a biological level. They really do ignite things because sometimes there's an adventure, like he's talking about, or the spontaneity, or the flexibility, or the unknown speaks to something different within us. Mm-hmm. But what I am intrigued by is his statement of, I'm attentive around the house. We co-manage a family and parenting well, and we do these love languages right, is what he's saying. Because this is what's interesting to me, because he is not the only one I've heard say this.
Yeah.
And it's oftentimes coming from a higher desire partner, because they think of igniting a spark in their spouse has some sort of formula to it. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a roadmap I could follow that will turn her on or turn him on. Mm-hmm. When anybody that's been caught in this desired discrepancy knows there might be a roadmap at one point, but then that roadmap changes. It's not constantly reliable.
Over time, over seasons of life,
right?
You're saying, yeah.
And even over moments, because you're talking about, why can't what we did at work, what we did at vacation, why does it not so? Why does it translate here? Because we had a relaxing Saturday. There was no plans, but it still wasn't the same kind of feel.
Yeah.
And so there's an element of, I think a lot of times we can get caught up in, and I'm speaking to the higher desires here, equating, well, I am demonstrating and showing the love languages that should turn you on. When I think if we really look at it, love and sexual attraction are two different things. They have two different goals. Mm-hmm. And so doing one won't create the other all the time.
Sure. And I guess the point of love languages, isn't that more about connection? I don't think that book was written for sexual desire. Right. His point
was not written for sexual desire.
Not.
Yes.
Is
correct.
that what I said? Did I
Yeah,
say
I'm just making
opposite?
sure it was clarified. Yes.
Yeah, that wasn't. So this is how am I showing love? How am I speaking to my spouse?
Right.
And you're right. That doesn't always create a sexual desire. That's not what the purpose of that was.
Right. Because both love and sexual attraction, they are mechanisms that support relationship dynamics. Mm-hmm. But love, and this is one of the things I came across, love promotes relationship maintenance and like a foundation, a framework of mm-hmm. the entirety of the relationship. Mm-hmm. Whereas sexual attraction just promotes sex, which we've constantly keep coming back to because it's so easy, based on the fact that when your sex life is good in a marriage, it actually only maybe captures about 15% of your energy and thought and in life. But when it's bad or non-existent, it can capture like 85% of your energy and thoughts, because you become so locked in on a aspect of the relationship rather than the entirety of the relationship. And so love is the entirety of it.
Yeah.
But sexual attraction, it differs because it's just for that one little piece and sliver of the pie. And so I think there's an element that's worth noting. And let's just, in case people are not familiar with the love languages, Gary Chapman came up with 5. It's words of affirmation, acts of service, gift giving, quality time, and physical touch. He kind of came up with that kind of speaks to a majority of people will land in one predominant and maybe a secondary that fits. Sometimes people can have 2 or 3 that speak. And what's oftentimes the case in the clients I get as far as that sample size, one person's love languages is not even closely connected to their spouse's love language.
Yeah, it's about being a student of your spouse.
Correct. Right? And it's also about being a student of yourself. Because it's understanding, okay, this is what speaks to me. And this is where, just a quick aside, I think Gary Chapman's, he's even talked about this towards the end of, as it kind of has blown up. It was one of the most widely sold and referenced books in the Christian world, in marriage world. But he references it in the case that it's intended for self-understanding and awareness more than it is a roadmap to connection. Okay. In the sense of, I must learn your love language to show you love. While that's a good goal, the entirety of that is not the goal, because there still becomes this element of how do I show love as I define love too.
Interesting.
Right. Okay. And that's the crucible of marriage. Of being a student of you for 31 years now almost has challenged me to learn to speak your language while still infusing it with mine. Right.
Well, because that helps you connect, because that's how you speak.
Right. And that's what makes it genuine when it's coming from what also is more natural to me. And so if you think about it, there's a huge difference between setting a framework of a good, loving, connective life, but still within that together, you've got to do things that instigate the desire, that can trigger the reaction of arousal. And that's not just physical touch even, because some people, they get turned off by that. There's a lot of people that can be, that's not their love language. And when you touch them and they're not prepared for it, it is almost to the point of a disgust reaction can come from it, or a ticklishness can come from it, or a quick jump back, which that's hard to then steer into. Well, you turned on now? Wow. I touched you, right?
Oh my gosh, they jumped back from me when I touched them.
Or I give a gift and that all of a sudden gets me access, and so it's just recognizing.
Wait a second. You're saying I give a gift and now it does turn on desire?
No.
That's the opposite of what we.
No, that's what I'm talking about. That kind of same framework of like, well, I gave you a gift. Now we should have sex. You should be turned on by that. I'm speaking your love language here, babe. Right. And it's like, that's not the same equation. And so for his email of how do they go about trying to create an environment that brings this about more? Well, one question I've got at one point first to make is to recognize the difference between being a good companion is not the same as instigating being a good lover.
And so what do you see as the difference there?
Well, I think that is absolutely the playground for it, because that creates a knownness, a comfort, a safeness, a reliability, a consistency. That's where
foundation, right? That's where you set the foundation.
Yep. But moving it into the world of attraction, that's more, how do you carry yourself? How do you bring in the alpha and beta traits of masculinity or presence? That's where last week's episode on masculine in relationship, which we had a great email that came in that talked about, don't fall victim to the idea that masculine only means male.
Right.
Masculine just means an energy and how I go about interrelating and facing the world. Same with feminine energy. And so how are you bringing that about in your relationship that can draw the possibilities of arousal, the possibilities of attraction. That's your presence.
Mhm.
More first and foremost, it's your presence with them leading towards and taking the leap of faith towards what it is you're trying to initiate.
Mhm.
And we had this comment last night in the academy call where we were talking afterwards about initiation mistakes.
Mhm.
And it was brought up the idea of, yeah, it was kind of understood it was going to happen because I can fall victim to this. I'll own it. That there was an agreed upon, hey, I'm coming after you tonight. Sex is happening. Let's go.
Yeah.
And so when the time actually comes where we can, somebody still has to start it. Because I can fall victim to, well, I did. I started it by bringing up the subject.
I brought it up, and I'm laying here in bed.
You
so
said
come on
you
and
said
get it
you're
rolling.
on board, so get on board. Lead this thing.
Yeah.
But instead, it's how do you instigate something? You set a good lead. You make that move. That has a greater likelihood of eliciting a sexual attraction than the bonding depth levels of love.
Mm-hmm.
When it's based on that, now on the foundation, you're already closer to the threshold, because then you're not just talking biology, you're talking the whole of your life with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a component of sexual arousal has a biological component to it, because we can find things arousing that we don't have any love basis with.
Absolutely.
And so that's just a biological chemical thing that can trigger. And so some of that in a marriage is a little harder to replicate because there's a different level of known. But there is an importance of how do you instigate that? And so my question for the helpful husband is, what's different about him on vacation possibly too?
Fair.
Because it's not just her environment has changed, so has his. Because I know, speaking from our experience, when we're on vacation, I relax more, which allows a little more of my playfulness to come out, a little more of my boldness to come out, and a whole lot more swimsuit and hot sun time, which relaxes both of us and has an element of turn on to it. Right. And so it's a different dynamic in me that's at play too. And so now how do I bring that home? Because that's the difference. Because it's not just, oh, she's at the beach and doesn't have kids around. No. Neither does he.
Right.
And so when he can ask the better question of, what is it about me that makes it to where maybe I'm more bold, maybe I'm more forthcoming, maybe I'm a little more risque with how I go about things. And yes, there's a different risk because the environment makes the better likelihood of landing, right? Or easier.
Yeah.
But you already know she's into it in some areas. So how do you bring that home is exactly that. You just figure out what's different about me there. And how do I start doing some of that here? Because I can still be the same person, even though the environment's different.
Yeah, no, I gotcha. You're both different when you can relax and be away. Anyone who has the recipe for having vacation sex at home, I gotta think is in the blessed few.
Okay. Well, that's also built largely on the fact that their presence is what makes them likely into the category of blessed few. That their engagement in life and their relationship already makes the threshold higher. And so then the last thought with this, because I came across this when I was kind of looking for some different thoughts on how people had framed this argument and this topic. One of the things I loved was we can use the love languages to set up a really good relationship. A deeper bonded dynamic between us.
Yeah.
I use what I need to help with as far as my presence, my instigating, my just diving in and being a little more risque or erotic or novel or whatever it is that gets me that turns me on too.
Okay.
And I bring that forward. And then when sex happens and is happening, use love languages as part of the sex too.
How so?
Was an element of, you can bring that love language to your sex life of, if I know you are a act of service person.
Mhm.
Well, how could I serve in my sex life
Fair.
in the midst
Fair.
of sex, not trying to get it, but in the midst of it? If you know I'm a physical touch, how could you up your touch?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden I'm using that framework within a smaller sliver of the marriage, as well as I'm trying to do the entirety of the marriage. Just don't make the mistake of thinking one gets me access to the other.